Welcome to Catalyst, a program about people, ideas, issues, and conversations around them.
Welcome to Catalyst. I'm Doug Webster, your host of the STEM education series, A Renewed Culture of Innovation. STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. This series was developed to discuss key issues around strengthening STEM education capacity, both here in Vermont and elsewhere in the United States. Today's episode is Pyrolysis, creating carbon-negative energy. And my guest today is Jock Gill, founder of FELLET Futures. Jock was a co-founder of the not-for-profit Grass Energy Collaborative and the for-profit Biomass Commodities Corporation. Jock worked in communications at the White House for the first Clinton administration. Welcome to the show, Jock.
Thank you, Doug.
Can you explain pyrolysis? What is pyrolysis?
Well, it's a vocabulary test. For a really good definition, Google it or go to Wikipedia, but in the simplest sense, what we do is we take biomass and we heat it up in a controlled environment such that it breaks down and releases all of the volatiles, which we can burn off, and leaves behind carbon. Biomass is effectively 50% carbon that's been taken out of the atmosphere by photosynthesis, and we can capture, on a good day, 30 to 40% of that, and then use that captured carbon in creative ways in agriculture, water treatment, manure treatment, and so forth.
Now, what are its ramifications when it comes to carbon release in the atmosphere, or lack thereof?
Well, it's an interesting problem. It's generally considered that we have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Merely slowing the rate at which we add to it is not really a solution. If our goal is to avoid climate disruption, it appears that it would be prudent to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And one way to do that is to capture that carbon that's in biomass, mm-hmm. and then put it to productive use. We're not in favor of taking carbon out of the atmosphere and burying it in a hole where we never see it again. We believe that the carbon is very valuable and should be used intelligently.
Mm-hmm. And can you show us how it works?
Well,
some examples here?
What I'm trying to do, I have been trying to do for the past few years, is develop no-cost, low-cost tools for teachers, mm-hmm. hands-on teaching tools that mm-hmm. allow teachers to introduce pyrolysis and its two primary co-products, thermal energy and biochar, mm-hmm. to their students. So I start with a can, mm-hmm. just a black bean can. I keep it very small in the beginning and very simple. So you start learning with baby steps. Then I take this can and I convert it to a little, what I call iCan, by, mm-hmm. here's an iCan that's been burned a few times. I put some holes in the bottom. I guess so if you can see those, I'll aim those at the camera a little bit better like that. Mm-hmm. In this particular case, there's 7 holes. It might be better to have 8 holes for this particular can. That's the primary air supply. And then 1/3 of the way down from the top, I make a ring of holes that are larger, and that's the secondary air supply. So what this becomes is what's called a T-lud, a top-lit updraft stove. And I fill it with 1/3 fuel. I have a 1/3 air gap, which creates a place for the wood gas to accumulate that prevents oxygen from coming down from the top and combusting. So one of the things we're doing here is we're able to study pyrolysis and compare and contrast it with combustion. So what I do is I call this, because it's all in one can, I call it an I can. So I have a little ditty. I sort of say, well, what can I do with one can? I can make a stove, okay? I can cook something. I can make biochar. I can be carbon negative, and I can start to change the world. So my goal is to get science teachers to consider introducing their students to pyrolysis and to compare and contrast it with combustion. And there are a variety of interesting things. You have the question of how do you locate the holes? What pattern do you use? What size do you use? Whether it's the primary air holes or the secondary air holes. So there's some very simple tools. The whole idea is to keep this very simple. You can use a flexible tape to measure circumferences and then divide the circumference by whatever you want, the number of holes, and then make lines. You can use trigonometry to figure out the length of the cord between the holes. In this case, it's very nearly, I've collapsed this, but in this case, it's very nearly 2 centimeters. I don't know if you can see this, but a divider in trigonometry is a very interesting way to figure out how to place holes so you have an equal number of holes evenly spaced, or you have an evenly spaced holes around. But once you have identified where you're going to put your holes on the bottom, for example, all you need is a roofing nail and a hammer or a rock, and you make holes with a roofing nail. I mean, let's get that down there. What could be less expensive and easier?
Yeah. Fairly low cost and accessible materials.
And the broad head of the roofing nail makes it easy to hit, so you're less apt to get pinched fingers. And then once you have made your hole in since you want to make a bigger hole, you can make your first hole with a roofing nail, and then you can take a nail set and manually make the hole larger. Now, with those simple steps, you've got a little stove, which you then put up on angle irons to keep the bottom up so air can flow under and up. And then you place it into a windshield and safety can. You gotta hold it up a little higher.
Yeah.
This was a 4-pound tuna fish can from a Quick Stop. But you now have a way that students can have a fire in a safe manner that's contained and controlled and easy to study. And the great beauty of a simple I-can like this is that you only fill it with 84 grams of pellets. So one of the questions is, how do you discover what 1/3 of a load of fuel would be? So it turns out in this particular can is 84 grams, so a kitchen scale is handy. So that's going to cost you about 2 cents. So with 84 grams or 2 cents of wood pellet fuel, you then have a nice little can that introduces you to pyrolysis. And I'll put this on the floor. You're basically taking this amount of fuel. Let's see, in the baggie here, let's get this. You can see that. 84 grams of wood pellets, about 2 cents. And when you're all done, you have a little bag of biochar. Now this is enough biochar to mix with compost, let it mature for a few weeks, and then use in testing to see how it affects plant growth, or use it to see how well it filters samples of water. At UVM, they've discovered that by preparing the biochar in a particular way, they can capture approximately 90% of the phosphorus in runoff water, which is an astounding success, and very important to Vermonters who are concerned about the water quality in Lake Champlain. But Vermonters are also concerned about something else. How do I heat my house? Which becomes ever more challenging as the cost of oil goes higher and higher, and we're now looking at $4 oil, probably pushing towards $5. So we'd like not to burn champagne fuels. We'd like to burn much cheaper fuels. And with pyrolysis, I can use seed pods, gum tree seed pods. I don't know how well you can see this little brown thing. They're nasty, they're hard. This is from Pennsylvania, but they turn into, I don't know if I went too fast there. It's hold against my shirt, you can see it. It's spiky, it's hard, they don't crush, they don't break. They're a real pain, but they turn into this beautiful biochar. I don't know if I can get a couple in my hand and maybe you can see them.
And those are burned right in the bottom of that can.
Well, actually, these are made in a slightly larger.
Yeah.
I mean, the form factor requires a slightly larger device. But these little balls of charcoal mixed with compost and other things to enrich them with minerals, microbes, nutrients, and water, then become fabulous soil amendments.
Right. Right. Now there are two locations here. One, we're talking about 3 billion people around the world that would have access to these cans or
make them out of ceramics.
Or ceramics. And what are you talking about for fuel in those situations? Can't you can use
there is a very large problem in a significant portion of the world where people cook on what are called 3-stone stoves or similar stoves that are very sooty. And the inhalation of those particles is the 4th or 5th leading cause of death of women and children in the emerging economies. So you could take this very simple stove, the idea, the concept, and refine it and scale it up to something more like what's on the floor here. I don't know if you can shoot the floor with that camera or not, but I can lift it up. Would that be better? I'll lift it up for you.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What we have here is, Doug, take the top 2 cans.
Here, I'll shuffle things around
Yeah,
here.
you take the top 2 cans, the top can of the plate. What you have here is a little eye can scaled up. It has holes in the bottom, different sizes, different pattern. Let's see if we can, I don't know if you can see the holes. They're 5/64ths, I think, so they're very hard to see. And some secondary air holes here. So it's the exact same idea. And then I add a middle piece, which has, we won't go into the reasons, but it has to do with controlling the flame. And then I add a top piece. And now I've got a larger surface, a larger area in which I can use to cook. And I've cooked hot dogs, and I've cooked fish, and I've cooked steaks and vegetables. And because what you have coming out from the pyrolysis is all that thermal energy. And the trick with pyrolysis is to use all the thermal energy and the carbon. And as an example, just to be sure I was walking the talk.
Can you show that picture? Yeah.
Last night, this is my salmon dinner that I cooked on the device I just showed you. And I cooked that on about 8 cents worth of wood pellets and about 8 to 9 minutes per side, and it was fantastic. Delmenico steaks, to die for. Vegetables, corn, you can do all sorts of things. You can put these in Weber grills and convert a Weber grill to a carbon negative grill. I mean, what you can do would require us going outdoors with the cameras and lighting fires and all those.
We can't do it in the studio here.
Can't do it in the studio.
Not today.
But so there's an application in the emerging world where you want clean cook stoves, but where there's a separate problem, which is food production. In the third world, soils are often badly abused and of relatively low quality and relatively low yield. And there's a lot of evidence, both current and historical, that adding properly prepared carbon to the soil gives you a great drought resistance and a substantial increase in yield in your crops. So that a farmer could actually pay for the fuel by we think, by the increased produce resulting from taking the charcoal from the cooking experience on a daily basis and putting it into a growing mound, much the way the first Europeans learned from the Native Americans to put fish into a growing mound to grow their corn.
So what is being done in the third world to get this out there in use?
Most of the work in the third world today is with stoves that use combustion that are designed to burn wood, typically, extremely cleanly. And they do a very good job at doing that. But they can't use really low-grade fuels. I mean, for example, another low-grade fuel, we took grass from Shelburne Farms and we densified it into little pucks, and then we turned the little pucks into charcoal. Okay, so this is grass, nondescript grass of one kind or another, that we turned into grass biochar. It's absolutely fantastic. But the heat that is thrown off when you make that biochar can be used to heat your house. So imagine heating your house with grass tablets or other agricultural waste streams, and at the same time making biochar that can go back into the agricultural cycle. So you're heating your house with fuel that costs less than $2 a gallon equivalent, versus $4 to $5 a gallon for number 2 fuel oil. So instead of exporting tens of millions of dollars for home heating out of the state of Vermont, we can keep that money in the state of Vermont. So when we talk about converting heating our homes from combustion of fossil fuels to the pyrolysis of biomass, we're really talking about creating a huge number of jobs. We have to invent the pyrolytic furnaces. They're starting to come. We have to train people to operate them, to install them, to clean them, to repair them. We have to train people to take the biochar out and properly account for it and then properly use it. So in a sense, what we're talking about here is, where are the new jobs going to be? And can we skate to where the jobs are going to be, rather than where the jobs are or were?
Well, what are the commercial products? Are there any on the market now?
Well, at most of the talks and demonstrations we give, Marshall Webb from Shelburne Farms and I do this, as you know, very few people have ever heard of the word pyrolysis, and perhaps even fewer have heard of the word biochar. And that tells us that this is a emerging awareness, an emerging technology, and if we look out and around us, we see that in fact there's a lot of activity, but there's no commercial, really honest commercial, well-developed market yet. We think that as in Vermont at least, where the arguments are very compelling for much lower cost home heating, phosphorus capture to clean up runoff, and there's a very interesting article in a recent issue of the Progressive Dairyman on biochar and manure, converting manure from a liability to an asset. So we think those three practical uses of biochar in Vermont will help us really develop a robust biochar market in Vermont.
So we need some entrepreneurs out there willing to take the risk and develop different products. And can you give any examples of anyone that's doing that, either here in Vermont or?
Well, there are. If you go to the stove list, Tom Miles has developed a list of people who are making devices, making biochar. The International Biochar Initiative has lists of people doing very interesting things. I mean, this is happening. I mean, this goes back at least several thousand years to the Amazonian Indians. If you talk to people in India, the use of carbon in agriculture in India is a very ancient practice. It's just we have become so focused on man-made fertilizers and industrial agriculture that we've lost sight of some of the traditional approaches that in fact might be quite useful as we go forward.
Now, when it comes to the whole biochar and pyrolysis and all that, what is your personal mission? What do you hope to gain? Where do you want to be in 5 years?
watching all sorts of wonderful people do lots of wonderful experiments with biochar and pyrolysis. I mean, our current goal, working with Marshall Webb at Shelburne Farms, as you know, we're working with Jerry Whitfield in Washington State, who's developing a pyrolytic furnace. And we're working to bring a prototype of this pyrolytic furnace to Vermont later in the second half, the fourth quarter of this year, and set it up at Shelburne Farms to test the concept. We're facing a real chicken and the egg problem here. We really like to do a lot of research with intercepting runoff water. Well, it takes a lot of biochar. Well, you can't make a lot of biochar in a can like this. You can't make enough to make filters to do the tests. It's very hard to make enough biochar in these basically coffee cans. You know, converted to stoves. I mean, this is a 3-pound coffee can from Costco. It's my basic raw material for making the stove I cook my dinner on, for example. You just simply can't make enough biochar fast enough to do the kind of research that we need to do. So we've got to find the interested people who can come up with the money to allow us to get the equipment to make, you know, a ton of biochar a week. Okay, which would be, you know, 50 pounds an hour would yield us about a ton a week. And that would give us enough biochar to start doing some serious experiments with, both agriculturally, water runoff, manure, home heating, or in this case, if we are making 50 pounds an hour, we'd be making about 400,000 BTUs of heat, which is enough to do some serious heating at Shelburne Farms. So, you know, Shelburne Farms has this mission to get off of all fossil fuels in the very near future. And Marshall and I have been I've been following in Marshall's footsteps as Marshall tries to figure out the plan for the farm to get there. They can grow a lot of grass. We can convert that grass to thermal energy. We can convert that grass to biochar. We can convert the biochar to filtration for runoff. We can mix it with manure. You can
do that now.
We can do it now if we could make it, if we had it.
Right. So is the challenge trying to make pyrolysis work in a larger diameter can, so to speak? Or
no, the challenge really is to get pyrolysis to work in a continuous feed environment rather than batch mode. These cans are clearly, you know, batches. You do a batch, you accomplish some work, and then you put the charcoal and water to quench it and cool it, you know, then you let the can cool off and you load it up again and you do a second batch and you iterate. I mean, last summer for my daughter's wedding, I cooked chicken for 50 on, in 3 grills that I had converted to be heated with pyrolysis.
Wow.
And it worked great. But of course, it was all handmade. It was all, you know, my constant attention. But it worked. So, and 50 people had chicken, and it was great. But we need students who understand pyrolysis, so it's a common word, who understand biochar, so it's a common word. And we need to catch their minds on fire. That we don't need to burn fossil fuels to heat our buildings. You know, phosphorus appears to be getting in shorter and shorter supply. It's really hard to grow things without phosphorus. So if we can capture the phosphorus and use it more effectively and more efficiently, that's a good thing. But it's working with people like Marshall and Will Rapp is interested in biochar, for example. The people at Moodoo, Bob Foster, you know, Bob's slogan is "We do moo." Well, "We do moo" with biochar added, we think would be an interesting value add. It's a little bit like you take milk or you make cheese, and how do you add the value? But that's a job. Someone has to be trained to do that. Someone has to understand how much of what kind. I mean, biochar, not all biochar is created equal. pH will vary. Well, what pH do I want, and how do I make sure that the biochar I make is the same from day to day? And if I change, if I'm taking old buckthorn, an invasive species, and I'm converting buckthorn to wood chips, and then I'm pyrolyzing those wood chips to heat the barn at Shelburne Farms, for example, and making buckthorn biochar. Well, what's the pH? How do I get the right pH? How do I mix it with the right compost to get the results I'm looking for?
Now, you mentioned earlier that the National Association for Workforce Improvement Conference last week, in your session you had, I think it was one person that raised their hand that understood what pyrolysis was.
Correct.
Or even heard of pyrolysis. And the same was true for biochar.
Correct.
Is that representative of the general population, you think? I'm
afraid so.
Yeah.
I mean, we have been a culture, an economy driven by combustion.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is, from about 1800 to about 1920, pyrolysis was key to making producer gas. And producer gas lit our buildings and powered our steam engines, stationary engines, and cooked some food. So the 19th century used producer gas, and producer gas was generally created by pyrolyzing coal. And the result of that is coal charcoal, which is called coke, which was then used to make steel.
Yep.
But once we started to get into liquid fossil fuels and natural gas, then those pyrolysis plants went away.
Yeah. So it sounds like we can bring those back, and
we can certainly rediscover the advantages of pyrolysis in the 21st century.
Sure. Great. Great. Well, that's about all the time we have, Jock. Thank you for being on the show, and thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. I look forward to making fire with you.
Okay. Good.
About